What started as routine late-night television turned into an explosive confrontation when Hollywood legend Sylvester Stallone faced off against Stephen Colbert in a heated exchange that left audiences stunned and the entertainment world reeling. So, Sly, you've been making action movies for what, 50 years now? Colbert began with his characteristic smirk, leaning back in his chair. Don't you think it's time to maybe pass the torch to someone who doesn't need a stunt double to tie their shoes? The audience chuckled nervously, but Stallone's expression hardened slightly. Well, Stephen, I've been doing my own stunts since before you knew what a camera was. Some of us believe in authenticity rather than hiding behind writers and teleprompters. Colbert's smile faltered for just a moment before returning with increased intensity. Oh, that's rich coming from someone whose most famous character speaks in grunts. Tell me, do you practice those "Yo Adrian" lines in the mirror, or does it just come naturally? The audience's laughter grew more uncomfortable as Stallone shifted forward in his seat. You know what, Stephen? I've been in this business long enough to recognize a cheap shot when I hear one. At least when I entertain people, they leave feeling inspired, not bitter and divided. Inspired? Colbert's voice rose slightly. By what? Exactly? Punching things until they stop moving? Your movies are basically violence porn wrapped in flag-waving patriotism. Rocky's just a meat-headed fantasy for people who peaked in high school. The studio fell eerily quiet. Stallone's jaw clenched visibly, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. That meat-headed fantasy gave hope to millions of people who felt like underdogs. It taught them that with hard work and determination, you can overcome any obstacle. What does your show teach people? That cynicism and mockery are substitutes for actual talent? Colbert leaned forward aggressively, his face flushing red. My show teaches people to think critically, to question authority, to not fall for simplistic fairy tales about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. Your movies are just Reagan-era propaganda disguised as entertainment. Reagan-era propaganda? Stallone's voice grew dangerously quiet. Let me tell you something, pal. I grew up in Hell's Kitchen when it was actually hell. I know what struggle looks like, what real poverty feels like. I didn't get where I am by tearing other people down or hiding behind political talking points. I earned every single thing I have. The host's eyes gleamed with malicious intent. Oh, please, spare me the rags-to-riches sob story. You're just another Hollywood dinosaur who can't accept that the world has moved past your caveman sensibilities. Your idea of character development is adding more muscles and bigger explosions. Stallone stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The audience gasped audibly. You want to talk about character development? Let's talk about yours. You used to be funny, Stephen. You used to bring joy to people. Now you're just another bitter has-been who thinks attacking guests makes you relevant. Colbert shot to his feet, pointing an accusatory finger across the desk. Has-been? I'm at the top of late-night television. I have more viewers in a week than your last 3 movies combined. Numbers don't mean much when you're spreading poison, Stallone fired back, his voice echoing through the stunned studio. You've turned comedy into a weapon, entertainment into ammunition. You don't interview people anymore. You ambush them. The tension in the room was palpable, as both men stood facing each other across the desk, their heated exchange having crossed every line of professional decorum. Camera operators exchanged uncertain glances while the audience sat in shocked silence, witnessing what would become one of the most explosive confrontations in late-night television history. Security personnel began moving closer to the stage. As Colbert's face contorted with rage, his carefully constructed television persona completely shattered. Don't you dare lecture me about poison, Colbert screamed, his voice cracking with fury. You've built an entire career glorifying violence. Your movies teach kids that the only way to solve problems is with your fists. Stallone's eyes blazed as he stepped closer to the desk. My movies teach kids to never give up, to fight for what's right, to protect the people they love. What do you teach them? That everyone who disagrees with you is an enemy? The studio audience sat frozen, some pulling out phones to record what was rapidly becoming television history. Production assistants frantically gestured to camera operators, unsure whether to keep rolling or cut to commercial. The red recording lights continued blinking ominously. "You're nothing but a relic," Colbert spat, saliva flying from his lips. "A washed-up action star who thinks flexing biceps passes for acting. You represent everything wrong with toxic masculinity. In this country," Stallone's laugh was cold and bitter. "Toxic masculinity? I've spent my entire career playing characters who protect women, who sacrifice themselves for others, who stand up for the weak. You wouldn't know real masculinity if it punched you in the face, which frankly might do you some good." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Several audience members gasped audibly while others began shifting nervously in their seats. Security guards moved within arm's reach of both men, ready to intervene at the first sign of physical escalation. Colbert's face turned an alarming shade of purple. "Are you threatening me on my own show? This is exactly what I'm talking about. The moment someone challenges your prehistoric worldview, you resort to violence." "I'm not threatening you," Stallone replied with deadly calm. "I'm stating a fact. You've gotten so comfortable attacking people from behind your desk that you've forgotten there are consequences for your words. Tonight those consequences are looking you right in the eye." The host's hands trembled with rage as he gripped the edge of his desk. "Get out of my studio, security! Get this Neanderthal out of here before he starts beating his chest." But Stallone didn't move. Instead, he placed both hands flat on the desk and leaned forward until his face was inches from Colbert's. "I'm not going anywhere until I finish what I came here to say. You want to know what's really toxic? It's hiding behind comedy to spread hate. It's using your platform to divide people instead of bringing them together. It's being so consumed with your own importance that you've forgotten how to treat people with basic human decency." The camera caught every detail of Colbert's face, as it cycled through emotions: rage, fear, and something that looked almost like shame. But the moment of vulnerability lasted only seconds before his fury returned with renewed intensity. "Human decency?" he shrieked. "You lecture me about decency while your entire filmography is a celebration of brutality. You made millions teaching American audiences that might makes right." Stallone straightened up slowly, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the studio. "I made millions teaching American audiences that sometimes good people have to stand up to bullies. Sometimes they have to fight back when someone tries to tear them down. Sometimes they have to be strong enough to face their fears." The implication was crystal clear. Colbert was the bully, and Stallone was making his stand. The audience held its collective breath as the two men locked eyes in a stare-down that seemed to last forever. "You think you scare me?" Colbert whispered back, his voice shaking with barely controlled emotion. "You think your tough guy act works on everyone? I see right through you, Stallone. You're just another insecure actor who compensates for his inadequacies by playing pretend heroes." Something snapped in Stallone's expression. "Inadequacies?" His voice was barely audible, but the menace in it made everyone in the studio freeze. "You want to talk about inadequacies? Let's talk about a man so desperate for relevance that he's forgotten the difference between entertainment and assassination. You've become a parasite, Stephen, feeding off other people's pain for applause." Colbert's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. For the first time since the confrontation began, he seemed genuinely speechless. The studio lights cast harsh shadows across his face, highlighting every line of stress and fury etched into his features. "I give people truth," he finally managed to croak out. "I expose hypocrites and charlatans. I hold up mirrors to show people what they really are." Stallone's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Truth? You wouldn't recognize truth if it wore a name. Tag, you've created an echo chamber where everyone who thinks differently is automatically wrong, automatically evil. You've turned political discourse into blood sport, and you're proud of it." The audience was completely silent now, mesmerized by the raw intensity unfolding before them. Several production crew members had their hands hovering over emergency buttons, ready to cut the feed if things escalated further. But nobody moved. They were all witnessing television history in the making. Colbert slammed his palm down on the desk with a thunderous crack that made everyone jump. "Don't you dare psychoanalyze me! You're nothing but a meathead with delusions of grandeur. Your opinions mean nothing. Your politics are garbage. Your movies are garbage. You are garbage." The personal attack hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Even the security guards looked shocked at the viciousness of the host's words. Stallone's face went through a transformation that was visible to everyone watching. The hurt, the disbelief, and then something much more dangerous. "Garbage," Stallone repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. "That's what you think of me. That's what you think of everyone who doesn't bow down to your worldview. We're all just garbage to you." He began walking around the desk toward Colbert, each step deliberate and measured. The host instinctively backed away, his bravado crumbling as the physical reality of the situation became apparent. Stallone was still in remarkable shape for his age, and his presence filled the studio like a gathering storm. "Stay back," Colbert shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "Security, do your jobs!" But the security guards hesitated, unsure of their role in this unprecedented situation. This wasn't a typical disruption. This was a confrontation between two public figures being broadcast live to millions of viewers. Stallone stopped just feet away from the trembling host, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than any shout. "You know what real garbage looks like, Stephen? It's a man who's forgotten how to show respect. It's someone who thinks cruelty is clever, who mistakes meanness for wit. It's a person so consumed with their own righteousness that they can't see how much damage they're doing." Colbert's back was now pressed against the backdrop of his own set, trapped by the very environment he had used to ambush countless guests over the years. His hands shook visibly as he pointed an accusatory finger at his advancing guest. "You can't do this!" he screamed, his voice reaching a pitch that bordered on hysteria. "This is my show, my studio. You don't get to come in here and intimidate me. I'll have you arrested. I'll sue you for everything you're worth." Stallone smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Intimidate you? I'm just having a conversation, Stephen. Isn't that what you wanted? A real, honest dialogue? Or do you only like conversations when you're the one holding all the cards?" The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of Colbert's complete breakdown. His carefully cultivated image as the cool, controlled satirist was crumbling in real time. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he realized he had pushed too far, gone too personal, and awakened something in his guest that he couldn't control. "I want you out!" Colbert shrieked, his voice breaking completely. "Get out of my studio! Get away from me! Security! Call the police! This man is dangerous!" But Stallone just stood there, calm and unmoved, letting Colbert's hysteria speak for itself. The contrast was striking. The composed movie star and the unhinged television host, the aggressor and the defender, the bully and his victim finally fighting back. "You know what the real tragedy is here, Stephen?" Stallone said quietly, his voice cutting through Colbert's panicked breathing. "You had everything. Talent, platform, influence. You could have used it to bring people together, to make them laugh, to give them hope. Instead, you chose to become everything you claim to. Hate, a bully who uses power to hurt people." Colbert's chest heaved as he tried to regain some semblance of control, but his eyes darted frantically around the studio, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. The audience watched in stunned silence as their host, the man who had commanded their attention and laughter for years, cowered against his own backdrop. "I'm not the bully here," Colbert gasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're the one threatening me. You're the one who came into my house and—" "Threatened you?" Stallone interrupted, his eyebrows raising in genuine surprise. "I never threatened you, Stephen. I simply spoke to you the way you've been speaking to your guests for years. How does it feel? How does it feel to be on the receiving end of your own medicine?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Colbert's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. For perhaps the first time in his career, he was truly speechless. Stallone took a step back, giving Colbert some breathing room, but his presence still dominated the space. "You see, that's the difference between us. When I play tough guys on screen, it's fantasy. It's entertainment. It's hope for people who need to believe that good can triumph over evil. But you? You've made cruelty your brand. You've turned real people's pain into punchlines." The studio was so quiet that the hum of the cameras seemed deafening. Production crew members stood frozen at their stations, unsure whether to intervene or continue recording what was clearly a career-defining moment for both men. Colbert finally found his voice, though it trembled with emotion. I satirize. I comment on the news. I hold powerful people accountable. That's what comedians do." "No," Stallone shook his head slowly. "Real comedians punch up, not down. They make fun of themselves, not their victims. They bring joy, not division. You've forgotten the difference between comedy and cruelty, between holding people accountable and destroying them for sport." The host's legs seemed to give out slightly, and he slumped against the wall, his expensive suit wrinkled and disheveled. The man who had spent years tearing apart his guests with surgical precision was now completely dismantled himself. "I don't," Colbert started, then stopped, shaking his head. "I don't know how to do this anymore. I don't know how to be funny without being mean." It was perhaps the most honest thing he had said all evening. The admission hung in the air like a confession, and something in Stallone's expression softened slightly. "Then maybe it's time to remember why you started," Stallone said, his voice gentler now but still firm. "Maybe it's time to remember that your job is to entertain people, not to educate them through humiliation. Maybe it's time to remember that the people you interview are human beings, not target practice." Colbert looked up at Stallone with something that might have been respect, or perhaps just exhaustion. The fight had gone out of him completely. "What am I supposed to do now?" Stallone straightened his jacket and adjusted his cufflinks, preparing to leave. "You're supposed to be better. You're supposed to use your platform to lift people up instead of tearing them down. You're supposed to remember that comedy is about joy, not pain." He turned toward the exit, then paused and looked back at the broken host. "And Stephen, you might want to consider apologizing to some of the people you've hurt over the years, starting with yourself." With that, Stallone walked off the set with the same dignity he had maintained throughout the entire confrontation. The audience remained silent as his footsteps echoed through the studio, the sound growing fainter until the heavy door closed behind him with a definitive thud. Colbert stood alone on his own stage, surrounded by his crew, his audience, and his cameras, but more isolated than he had ever been in his life. The red recording lights continued to blink, capturing every moment of his complete professional and personal collapse. The incident would dominate social media within minutes, trending worldwide as clips of the confrontation spread like wildfire. Critics and fans alike would dissect every word, every gesture, every moment of the exchange that had laid bare the toxic culture of modern late-night television. Within hours, advertisers began pulling their support, ratings plummeted, and serious questions were raised about Colbert's future in broadcasting. The man who had built his career on destroying others had finally met someone who wouldn't be destroyed, and in the process had destroyed himself.